Today we have with us nuclear physicist and author of My Big Toe, Tom Campbell. Hello, Tom.
Hi, Daghda.
Tom, my first question is about female rights issues. Quite often, Westerners imagine that female rights are violated for the most part in the Middle and Far East, and that it's also a third world problem. But as highlighted in the award-winning movie The Invisible War, women of all ranks in all areas of the American armed forces have to contend with verbal and sexual abuse. This is mirrored in the armed forces of other Western countries. Harassment of women in the workplace is extremely common. Also, sex trafficking is huge business, and in every large city in the West, we have females of all ages who have been trafficked and forced to work in the sex industry. The abuse of females is worldwide, and it has been throughout history. Tom, you have talked about personality being constructed from nature, nurture, environment, and individual quality of consciousness. And you have also talked about primal forces that are hardwired into genetic makeup. My question is, are males at the primal level hardwired to disrupt and subvert female free will?
Well, the very short answer to that is no. Men are not hardwired to be unkind to women, and subvert their free will. That's not the case. But the circumstances, as we've found them, as we have evolved, has made it seem that way. If we just look at it without understanding what's going on in a bigger picture, it does indeed look like males have been hardwired to, dominate females. And once you're dominant, of course, you don't treat what you dominate very well. Whether it's the hired help, whether it's, the animals in your house or whatever, we see a lot of mistreatment of what's dominated. So we start with the fact that most cultures on our planet are dominated by men. It's a patriarchy, as it's said. That just means male-dominated society. And I don't know the statistics, probably 90% or more of our cultures that thrive here, all sorts of different cultures are, patriarchies. It's a male-dominated culture. And there's a reason for that. It's not just an accident that happened, or that men have evil attitudes toward women in their heart, that just happened, or even that men are bigger or stronger and therefore they dominate just by physical presence. Those aren't the reasons. To understand the reasons, you have to understand our genetic programming, the gender-specific genetic programming. Okay? Males genetically are programmed to respond to problems, to specific problems. Okay? Now, when I say respond to and programs, I'm talking about programs that took 1 million years to write. These are programs in your DNA, programs, genetic programming. So it's not really programming, we think of a programmer sitting down and writing it, but they're programs that are written in our genes just by evolution, by trial and error. What works? This is what was needed in order to succeed as a species, in order to survive and procreate as a species. There were certain things that worked better than others. And as all the various things that could have gone on, did go on, the ones that worked kept going on, and the ones that didn't stopped going on. So we're left with, what works. And over millions of years, what works and is beneficial for the species gets programmed, as you will, in the DNA, and we call this instinct. So basically, we, like any other critter, we're an animal, right? We're the human animal. Homo sapiens is an animal just like a giraffe or a dog. We're an animal, and we have instincts, and these instincts, just like the giraffe and the dog, have generated over millions of years of being, and they give us a kind of a hardwired attitude, a hardwired way of going about dealing with the world that is instinctual. It should be mentioned, though, that just because we have instincts doesn't mean we're a slave to them. We also have free will and a brain. and to consciousness, and we should be able to kind of guide our behavior through this maze of our instincts without actually trying to fight our instincts. If you try to fight your instincts, in other words, force yourself to do things and be counter to your instincts, you'll probably just make yourself neurotic. You will be working against who you really are at the root. That's not healthy either. So we want to guide our progress kind of with the instincts, and that way we will develop new instincts. But for a little perspective, our instincts have been programmed, been created over a long, long, long time. And what we think of as recent history, much like recent history, just history, even just the last 2,000 years, which is kind of what we look back at as or even the last 4,000 years. That's just an eye blink in the time that I'm talking about that this genetic code was being formulated into our instincts. So we have millions of years where it's been developed, and now here we are in the last eye blink or two of time, in just the last, let's say, 200 or 300 years, you see, our surroundings, our environment has changed dramatically. Probably even over the last 1,000 years, our environment has changed dramatically. That first 1,000,000 years or so, we had a very hard time of surviving. There weren't big cities. There wasn't infrastructure, hot and cold running water, electricity, supermarkets, automobiles. We didn't have all that. It was tough just to survive, just to keep the race going. So the hardwire, the program, is written differently for males and females. And the reason it's different is because males and females have different attributes, you see. And if you take those differences, which I call the asymmetries between male and female, then they are they're the reason why we develop differently. Well, the one obvious asymmetry is the females, get pregnant, carry the babies, and birth them. The men don't. Well, that's a very big difference. Okay, so this is what I mean in asymmetries. Another asymmetry is that the males are larger and stronger than the females. Okay, we also have different attitudes, different ways that we interpret our world, and different things, different ways we interpret our world is the best thing. And in our popular culture, that's been described as men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Women are from Venus. We just don't see things the same way. We don't have the same needs, expectations. We're just different. Okay, that's, I guess, the way to sum that up. Well, why do we have these differences? In that first 1,000,000 years or so, in this genetic code, which is still running in us strong, you don't change that genetic code in just 1,000 years. It's millions of years in development. Now we can eventually change it. Maybe 1,000,000 years from now, it'll be totally different than it is now. Maybe even 10,000 years from now, it might be quite a bit different than it is now. But in those 1,000,000 years, think of small tribal organizations trying to stay alive. Individual, like the nuclear family as we understand it today, couldn't exist by itself. You'd have to be part of a social organization, a tribe, or you are not going to survive. It took a bunch of people together to deal with the threats that were out there. Okay, the first kind of threats that you have to deal with are the basics of life. It's food, shelter, and basically war. Now, why is war a basic of life? Well, we're going a long time ago, and I don't think they had any higher quality of consciousness than we do now, which means they're full of fear and full of ego, just as we are. Hopefully even fuller, because hopefully we've progressed, over the last 1,000,000 years quite a bit. So I think it is even safe to say they had more fear and ego, than we do now, if that's imaginable. And what's the easiest way to get something that you need as far as food and shelter? The easiest and quickest way is to take it away from somebody else. If somebody else has a nice cushy cave, with running water in the back and that sort of thing, and you don't, well, if you're bigger and stronger than they are, you simply take it away from them. And I think that's mainly, the way the tribes interacted with each other. They fought because this was a desperate fight for survival. It wasn't about being nice to your neighbors. It was about, will you live, will you have something to eat tomorrow and a place to hide tonight. So there was a lot of warring and taking things from each other, because that's easier than building something or growing something, is to take something. So this was constantly going on. Probably the best thing that limited that was just there weren't that many humans. There wasn't 7 billion like we are now, shoulder to shoulder all over the world. They had lots of space without having necessarily to run into each other, but of course they did. It wasn't, the lots of tribes were in distance of each other where they could interact. So the men are genetically programmed to deal with the outside world. The outside world being find the shelter, build it, arrange it, get it, defend it, and basically war, soldiering, protecting the tribe. Okay, that's what the men did, because that's food. And it's scarcity. Find the food, find the shelter, protect from others who would like to have your food and your shelter. Right, so that was the male thing. Well, that's part of survival, is security and sustenance. Well, what's the other half of survival? It's keeping the children alive long enough that they can grow up to be the adults, right? You have to maintain the integrity of the tribe and the group. You have to be able to have children and raise children. And the females who have the children, okay, they specialize, their skills are in relationship. Okay. They don't need to be as large physically, because they're not, they're not the soldiers, they're not the warriors, they're not the army or whatever is protecting the tribe. They can be smaller, therefore they use less of the food. Therefore, there's a little more to go around. You see, it's scarce. So the women would tend to be a little smaller, men are a little bigger, women have the babies. A pregnant woman needs some help in this kind of environment. She can't run and, do the kinds of things that, the males can do. So she needs protection. So the males also are hardwired to protect the females. Okay, so now we're seeing a different, we're seeing how the genetics is kind of producing different programs, different instincts in both males and females. I'm just skirting it. There's a lot more detail to it, and I should tell the audience listening to this, if you want the whole logical derivation, go to the My Big Toe forum. You can get there from www.mybigtoe.com. Go then to discussion group, join the forum, go to the topic What I Say, and you'll find a logical derivation that's the kind of the basis of what I'm telling you now. That would take us a couple hours just to work our way through all of that, and I'm, you know about it, and a lot of the people who are listening to this will know about it, but if you're kind of lost and don't think I'm giving you enough background to justify what I'm saying, then the justification is in this derivation. And very shortly you'll also find it just on my website, and you'll find it at www.mbtevents.com. It'll be there under free stuff, and then scroll down and the gems from the forum. So look there for the actual derivation of these things. I'm just skirting over the top of them now. So we have these different kinds of programs, and the women are programmed to pay attention to the inside world. Okay? The men are worried about the outside world. The women have to be concerned with the inside world. The inside world has to do with relationship primarily. Relationship to the men, of course, relationship to the children, relationship to each other, because the other women are their support group, because they take care of each other's children, they help, so that's the home front, right? So they also did most of the domestic work, or what we call domestic work now, because that was part of the inside job. Mm-hmm. And we know now, we can look at that and we see how men and women are different in many ways. Women parallel process much better than men do. Women can do 2 or 3 things at one time, keep a bunch of things going, because that was their life. That's that inside focus on relationship. Men are very tightly focused on the object or whatever it is they're doing. That takes all of their focus. And you ladies know that because your guy's watching the football game and you talk to him and he doesn't even hear you because he's focused. Where you can watch a football game, knit a sweater, and talk on the phone all at the same time, and it's not a problem. Men tend to have a narrower focus because that's what it takes to be a good provider and a good warrior. You have to really focus on your goal, and everything else needs to go away. So we're just different in a lot of ways. So now, a society, I'm going to finally get to answering your question. Okay. All that's background. A society that where the primary concerns of that society are food, shelter, and war. Okay, so that's food, shelter, and defense. I don't mean that going out and making war, but defense of the group or the tribe. If those are the primary concerns, then you will have a male-dominant society. Because that's what the men do, right? And the women will not be dominant, and they won't even be equal, because it'll be a male-dominant society. And how will the men in a male-dominant society see women? They will see women in terms of the services that they provide. Mm-hmm. Okay, mother, wife, cook, housekeeper, the services that the females provide for the men and for the children. That's the way men will see women in a male-dominant society. Okay, and if we went the other side and said, well, what about a female-dominant society? They would see men, from the women's viewpoint, but they would still see men in terms of the services they provide. But it would be the services to the women and the services to the children. So it would just be different. But it would be symmetric. That's just the way it is. So the men will see the women that way. Now, we have had a situation here on this planet for most of those millions of years where the real serious problem was food, shelter, and protection, security, if you will. Without the security, it doesn't grow. Mm-hmm. Because of that, we have mostly had male-dominated social groups, male-dominated tribes, male-dominated cultures, male-dominated cities, governments, whatever, because we're in the scarcity mode. Okay, scarcity mode means it's food, shelter are the key things. And we're in the fear mode, which is something's going to get us. We need protection, we need security so that our families can be raised and we can all survive and procreate. All right, so that's why if you look around today, you'll find almost all of our cultures are male-dominant. Mm-hmm. Because we come from this long history of scarcity and insecurity. So that's what the men do. So that means they're the dominant force in the culture because those are the dominant needs of the culture, you see. So that's why we are the way we are. It's not just that, men have this intrinsic dislike of women or want to control them. It's just the circumstances. I'm talking now about large forces that are working over eons, to shape us the way we are. Well, now, in the last eye blink of our history, the last few seconds of our history, that's not the case anymore. Probably half the population isn't really that, it's not that critical about where the next meal's coming from. probably at least half the population of the world isn't that worried about where the next meal comes from. So hunger and shelter, though not adequate by far everywhere, they're not desperate everywhere. They're desperate some places. Mm-hmm. So I'm only saying 50, and I think that's probably a number, should be a little bigger than that, but not even wanting to start any arguments. We'll just say that about half the people in the world, of course, half the people in the world live in cities, probably. Mm. And in cities, life can be hard. There's lots of poor people living in cities, but most of them will have something to eat the next day, and most of them will have some sort of shelter that they get in. Not all of them, but most, the big majority. So we're really making a transition now out of that time in our lives when we lived in caves and lived in trees and had that kind of in-your-face, food, shelter, and physical survival issues. And they're not that, the tiger isn't nipping at our heels anymore. Well, that means we're in a transition now. But here we are for what can we say, maybe 200 or 300 years that this has been the case, that there's been, at least let's just think of Western culture. Mm-hmm. I don't know that much detail about Eastern culture, but it's probably not that far different. In Western culture, for the last 200 or 300 years, most of the people probably have not been in that survival desperation mode. All right, but that 200 years, 300 years is only a few seconds of time. If you made our total evolution as a species be a day, the last couple hundred years would probably be a few seconds, out of that day. It wouldn't be much. So we're still pretty well programmed, the way we were. All right. So that kind of tells us why males dominate all over the planet in most of the cultures. It's because we have a history of being in that food, shelter, security mode of thinking. And because that's our habit, and because the men are in charge and that's what they do, we're lingering in that even when we could be shifting more. The transition's going to take some time because habits come back in a culture as rules. They come back in a culture as this is the way it is, you see. Anything else is wrong. This is natural, but it's basically habits, ways of being. We develop cultures, and the culture takes on that view and basically, sanctifies it, and it kind of becomes almost the sacred view, the way it is, the way it's supposed to be. That's just nature, So we have this mindset, and it's in our culture now in a way that the change is going to take some time. But we see the signs of the change all over the place because we're now in this transition period where the male dominance skill set is not that useful anymore. You see, this thing with security and violence, and if you have something I don't, then I'll take it from you. We don't have to go back too many hundred years when that's the way it was. Tribes fought tribes, nations fought nations, and mainly what was it over? Land grabs, wealth. You think why did the New World get settled? Because the rumor was that it had lots of gold in it. Mm-hmm. We came for the gold. These kinds of attitudes are outdated now. We don't do that so much anymore. Even in our wars, after the war's over, we tend to give most of the property back. Mm-hmm. It's kind of different now. So we're outgrowing this thing. But with males, this is their thing that they do. And we often have this mindset of scarcity. Make sure we have ours. Make sure our family, our nation, our hemisphere in the world, whatever, that we have all the resources and the security that we need. So that's the way men think. They think in terms of that because that's how they're programmed to think. Now women think in terms of relationship. How with the resources that the men bring in and with the shelter I got and these babies, how can we get by? You know, how can we all survive? Including the men and the babies and themselves. They see it in terms of relationship. The way you ensure that survival is by communication with each other, helping each other. Okay, these are what I'm calling relationship skills. Well, what sort of skills do we need now? Where are we in this big movement, you know, that has brought us to where we are now? Well, we're kind of, at least in the West and most of the East, we're going from the transition of where the male skill set, if you will, that gives us male dominance, needs this female skill set of how we all get along together. Okay, we're not worried about being eaten by the tiger tonight. We're mostly sleeping in a house of some sort, you know, and are reasonably comfortable with, you know, it's warm in the winter and maybe not cool in the summer for most of us, but at least it's warm in the winter and we can get some food. But what's causing our main problems now? Our main problems now are getting along. We're not fighting so much for food and for security as we're fighting for ego and fear. You know, it's the dominance thing is what's fueling a lot of the conflicts. What do we need? What skill set is going to help us fix that? It's the feminine skill set of relationship. How do we all get along? So you see, we're kind of we've run into the times now where the male's skill set has served us well. We've survived. Otherwise, we may not be a human race. Now we're getting to the point where all of the ego and fear, we're clashing with each other. You know, we have a lot of unnecessary wars because people are just trying to grab more resources, dominate more stuff. What we are desperately in need of now is relationship skills, getting along, sharing, caring, empathy. See, these are all part of relationship skills. So we're right now in that transition. But when I say transition, I'm not talking about weeks or months. We're talking about very big forces here that move very slowly. And you have the entrenched cultural values that reflect male dominance, the male skill set. And that's going to take a while to work that off. But just as we have hit this transition where the survival isn't, you know, the fundamental, the basic needs are already met. Survival from day to day isn't the big issue. Notice, it's been in the last 200, 300 years when women have started to say, hey, guys, you know, we want to be included in this process as well. Okay, we're not that worried about the tiger at the door anymore. And the women's movement, awareness of that we're treating, you know, that women are not treated as well as they should, and in a male-dominant society, because those males have fear and ego, just as the females have fear and ego. That means when they're dominant, sometimes they're not so nice. So we have these not so nice things you talked about dealing with women. You know, we have this attitude. The women aren't as valuable as the men, sort of thing, in that, you know, they don't make as much wage. They, for a long time, were limited in career choice. They couldn't go to college. They couldn't be doctors and lawyers. You know, they had their role and the men had their role, and it was different. But that's, you know, that's changing. But the change is going to be slow. So what we're hoping for now is that this change will take place more quickly. The more prosperity, the more fear, you know, the more prosperity we have, the less fear we have. If we could have a little more peace where we weren't warring with each other, if we could have a little more sharing of the goods, so it wasn't a survival stretch. And I think we've gotten there, and mostly in the Western world, we've kind of gotten to that point. You know, the warring is small, it's not big, you know, we're not doing world wars so much anymore. We're down to skirmishes. Yes, they're ugly and they're unnecessary, but I'm just saying it is toning down, you see. And the voice of the women is toning up. It's getting louder and more prevalent over the last 100 years or so. And so you see, we're in transition. It's working. So what do we do from here? We try to tone down the angst, because that doesn't help. We need to realize that it's not the men against the women or the women against the men. We cannot approach this as an adversarial solution. You don't use force. You don't win a battle through force. Now that brings us to maybe a discussion of laws. Well, where laws are discriminatory, they should be changed. Okay? Obviously, that's just the way it is. But laws are very limited into what they can do.
It's interesting you should say about the laws, because some of the, I've read that some of the women's rights groups are talking about maybe there should be laws enforced to make prostitution totally illegal and to make pornography totally illegal. And as far as the prostitution goes, fining the men as well, and then making pornography completely illegal and this type of thing. That's being talked about right now.
Yes, it is. And those two ideas in particular probably, I would say, are not really good ideas. The problem with law is it forces, it works by force. Well, you can't force anybody to grow up. What we need people to do is lose some fear, see a bigger picture, okay? Grow the quality of their consciousness, move a little more toward becoming love, the empathy, the relationship values are now more important. We need to move that way, but it has to be at the being level. If it's just that you force somebody to act better, you haven't really fixed the problem. All you've done is you've fixed some of the symptoms. So the laws are good in that they make us behave more civilized. And if you're on the receiving end of discrimination, you'd like to have people behave more civilized towards you. So definitely that's good. But realize that it doesn't solve the problem. The problem is there. And you may keep the problem out of the daylight. But as soon as you're inside the house, as soon as you're out of the public eye, then nothing's changed, you see. And you've got lots of like violence might not be the right word, but you've got lots of this struggling going on because you haven't fixed anything at the fundamental level where the problem is. You've just passed laws that say if you get caught doing this, these things, trafficking or prostitution or whatever, you're in trouble. Well, no, I shouldn't have said trafficking. That's a different thing. That's like slavery. That's, a totally different thing. That's obviously just wrong, period. Okay, whereas prostitution, there are probably 1 million women who, if they could not work in prostitution, they and their children would starve to death, you see. So you eliminate prostitution and you've just put a whole lot of women in a very tight place where they and their children would just starve to death. So, you have to be careful. There's also women's groups that are very much in favor of pornography. Now, it's not the same kind of pornography, perhaps, that, we're used to seeing. Some pornography is ugly, and some is just romantic. Okay, it doesn't have to be hardcore. And you're going to start all sorts of fights around the edges of what is pornography, what is hardcore, what is softcore, what should be banned, what shouldn't, and why. If you look at some of the sexual therapy programs, how do they help people regain a healthy sexual attitudes and a happier life, a better can we say, they can stop fighting with their instincts. They get an existence that is much better for them and for their wives and for their husbands. Well, often they use this pornography as part of the therapy. You see, now we ban all that. Well, maybe. See, we're talking about something that's very contentious, and there's good sides to it perhaps too, ways that it's, if you take it away, would be harmful. Let's put it that way. Let's not say good sides. Let's just say if you take it away, it might hurt. Okay? So I don't think that's where we want to go with laws. But we obviously need laws, and like trafficking. That's basically, seems funny, but you know what do they call that? They call that white slavery, as if white slavery was any different than black slavery or green slavery or anything else. I mean, it's just slavery. If you trap somebody, don't let them leave, they can't go, you basically own them and they do what you want or you beat them. That's wrong, obviously, and laws against that should be very strong. You know, that makes us more civilized, but it doesn't change us much at all. So sometimes you need to deal with the symptoms when the symptoms are that severe, harsh, and ugly. So, you know, laws are good, but let's not overdo it. You know, we're not trying to build walls between the men and women. That's not, you know, with laws, that's not the point. We want to cut out things that are obviously wrong, like the trafficking, like slavery, and then we want to help people grow up, see the bigger picture, educate. And I've seen that in my country, in the United States, when it comes to race. Okay, you know, I'm 2 years short from turning 70, so I was aware of what was going on in my society, you know, back in the probably early 50s, before I was old enough to really be aware of social things. You know, it was the early 1950s. Well, at that time, blacks and whites did not go into the same restaurant, did not use the same restrooms, you know, did not have the same opportunities in education, and on and on and on and on, or employment and whatever. We've made tremendous strides since then. And some of that's because of law. Laws have changed. But racism is still still alive and well in the United States. It's not out in the open. You don't see it anymore, but go ask some black people whether or not they feel it anymore anywhere. And of course they'll tell you, not nearly as much. You know, if they're my age, they'll say, not nearly as much as we did, but it's still there. But it's come a long way. It's not nearly as much there. We've learned a lot. We have a black president now. We elected him twice. Elected him and re-elected him, see? That couldn't have happened in 1950. That would have been impossible. So, you know, that's an individual person inside a voting booth where nobody but him is, and the curtain's pulled around him, and it's totally private. So it doesn't have anything to do with the law or, you know, public opinion. That's personal. We've made huge strides, you know, in trying to get racism out of our culture, but it's through education. It was, you know, it wasn't because the laws made us change. It was because we realized it was wrong. And that's the same thing that has to happen in the women's movement. So I don't think the idea of legislating ourselves out of this problem is going to work. Legislating ourselves out of some of the worst symptoms of the problem, absolutely. We need to do that. But besides that, education. Bring it up, what's going on. Ladies, tell us how you feel. You know, the people doing documentaries, let's see some documentaries about this trafficking and about, you know, abuse, and about how women still have a real hard time in the workplace getting paid the same amount as a job that the men do, and how they have a hard time getting promotions in some of our industries. Now, other of our industries, like the cosmetic industry, they get promoted real well, and they're the CEOs, you know, at the top of it. And some professions are female professions, like nursing. Well, now, over the last decade, we've seen a lot of men going into nursing. 20 or 30 years ago, a male nurse was a real strange thing. Now, there's a lot of male nurses. It's a good profession to go into. It used to be that there were no male stewards on the airplanes. They were all female. Now there's men doing that, and vice versa. There are females, lawyers, doctors, Indian chiefs, everything, scientists, mathematicians. There are females in every form. We are doing it. See, the change is happening.
Oh, sure.
It's just slow, but that's how it happens. It happens in this, as we integrate our works, our tasks, that sort of thing. That lets us live with each other, just like it helps when the blacks moved in to the neighborhood, then the whites in the neighborhood who didn't panic and run away found out that they make really good neighbors, just as good neighbors as the whites. There's really no difference. It's a skin color and it's irrelevant. So that is what changes the society. It's the education. So, when we talk about laws, I just caution. I'm not against laws. Obviously, laws are important, particularly when you find discrimination. Laws are important. But laws won't fix the problem. They'll just civilize it. So the problem has to be deeper than that. And that's an education and an experience problem. It just takes time. I mean, the U.S. has been struggling with this race issue, for 250 years, 200 years, since the country was a country, been struggling with this race issue. And it's only been in the last 50 years that we've made kind of a great leap forward. But even before then, it got better, a little bit better, but, it was still pretty bad. But now it's much better, but still has a long way to go. But it's in process. It's moving. We now can elect a black president of the United States. And again, I say that's not pressure by law or even by public opinion. That's just individuals. Well, that's kind of an impressive place to get to if you go back where I remember at 50 years ago. Okay, so we're in this male dominance thing, not because men are mean-spirited and like to dominate women, but because our skill set has been the one that's been needed for almost the whole time that our instincts were written in our DNA. Almost all of that time, the men's skill set was the most dominant, because if you can't survive, if you can't eat, you don't have shelter, well, nobody's going to make it.
And this is the mindset of scarcity, and I'm presuming that the mindset of scarcity coupled with low quality of consciousness leads to the incredible abuse of females that we're seeing. But what I'd like you to do maybe is walk us through that actual process. So you get from the mindset of scarcity to the incredible abuse, and also this might be a good time also to talk about the quality of consciousness thing, low quality of consciousness coupled with the mindset of scarcity, causing the males to go ahead and profoundly abuse.
It's the mindset of scarcity as well as the mindset of insecurity, physical protection. Somebody's going to come over and take your stuff, and you need to guard against it. Or you need to go get somebody else's stuff because that's easier than getting your own. So it's that kind of, it's security and scarcity. That's the problems. Those are the two problems that it's the men's job to solve those for the tribe, which is for the women, for the children, and for the men themselves. Okay, so if you take that as the skill set, well, what does that take? That takes somebody who's bigger and stronger, takes somebody who fights, takes somebody who's maybe a little belligerent. We're like cavemen, right? Take somebody that's got, these kinds of skills, those kinds of attitudes. If you're good at being a warrior, you're probably also good at being a hunter. But I think we were warriors, we were fighters, we were soldiers for many, many, many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years before we ever domesticated fire, before we ever put pointy rocks on the ends of sticks and became hunters. So it's that protection thing is more fundamental to us than that hunting thing. But the skills for protection, for the most part, the skills for hunting. The warring the warring skills and the hunting skills are kind of, they go on the same line. Now it's war with a deer instead of war with other, with other men, and war with saber-toothed tigers. It's kind of changed from protection to getting food. Now you eat the tiger, So you can see how that skill set kind of went over. But we're fundamentally more warriors than we are hunters. Then we were hunters for a long time too. But that again was probably just in the last hour of our evolution, if evolution was a day. So what does that have to do with things? Well, you see the kind of person who is a warrior, the kind of person who is, that you value their strength, their ability to take charge and, now we do this, now we pull up camp and move, now we build a fort, and fight, now we, whatever. And they're in charge. And the women, like I say, become viewed in a male-dominant culture in terms of their services. Okay. And the women need to do what they're told by the men, because otherwise, no security, no shelter, no food, nobody lives, everybody dies, species is gone. So that made sense. Made sense to the women. Made sense to the men, you see, because that's the kind of environment we were in. Okay, now, take that attitude of the warrior who's in charge and give him a lot of fear, give him a lot of ego, which is what obviously he had. Hopefully, like I say, we have less, that we have, evolved some with our consciousness in the last, 20,000 years or 100,000 years. But, so give him this ego. And what do you have? Well, you probably have some nice guys, but you probably have some bullies too. And those bullies probably tend to end up being the leaders. So that's just what happens with a low quality of consciousness. You got power, well, use it. You see, you can bully other people, particularly women who are smaller, who are, doing their relationship thing, which helps keep the tribe alive. Obviously, if it wasn't for the women, humankind wouldn't have survived either. You needed the women there, not only having the babies, but pulling the whole social fabric together. See, they're the ones that create that social fabric. They're the ones that basically keep the family together. The man's there with the woman to help with the children, to bring them food, to protect them, to be the father to the children and so on. You need that, and it's her social skills that pulls it. She's the glue and the magnet, if you will, that pulls the whole social thing together so that the tribe works. Mm-hmm. See, he keeps the tribe alive. Well, she keeps it alive too, but in a different way. She bears the children and kind of organizes the society to something that sticks together. So that, you see, it takes both, and it's different. So you get a person who is a low quality of consciousness, and by that I mean someone who acts out of fear and out of ego. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about here, those of you who just tuned into this but haven't seen any of the rest of my stuff, please go to YouTube and look at the Calgary workshop. Look at all day Saturday and all day Sunday too. And if you do that, you'll know everything I'm talking about ego, quality of consciousness, all that stuff will be explained in detail, and it will make sense to you. In this interview, we can't do all that, or there'd be another 2 hours on top of the 2 hours we're going to take anyway. So see, that's what happens. You have that low quality of consciousness. You got the guy who's the strong guy, and you end up with things like, women being second-class citizens. You end up with this trafficking. You end up with that kind of dominance. Look how we treat anything or anybody that we dominate. Okay, look at the people who have servants. How do they treat their servants? Well, some of them very nicely, and some of them not so nicely. But even when it's fairly nice, it's do this, come now, do that. And we expect obedience. You see, we don't treat them as equals. We don't treat them as a member of the family. They're servants. You see, it's a mindset.
So the low quality of consciousness men, with still this mindset of scarcity, then start to use the women as a service provider.
Right.
Service provider, and then from there, because they're low quality of consciousness and limited, they go ahead and start. It's easy for them in that mindset to start to abuse.
Yes.
So the guys who do the abusing are limited and low quality of consciousness.
Oh, sure. But now let's also say that the women are in the same boat as far as their quality of consciousness goes. You see, it's not that women, are all, embodiments of love and they don't have any ego. They too have low quality of consciousness, just like the men do. Matter of fact, if you read that logical derivation I give, the men and the women in any society are very likely to have about the same quality of consciousness. So, but the thing is that here the men are with their men's skills. Fight, subdue, dominate, take charge of. So when you have that skill set and a low quality of consciousness, you're liable to get abuse of the service providers.
And we're a dominant male society anyway,
Yeah.
so now we can see how that leads to the abuse of females worldwide, because it's a male-dominant society.
Right. And it isn't that way because the men, fought the women and took over. It's that way because it's just a natural progression of where we've come from. We needed that male-dominant society or there wouldn't be a human race. Well, we don't need it so much anymore. Matter of fact, it's getting in the way. We're having a lot of unnecessary wars. Nobody's trying to come take our stuff away, and we're still fighting wars, you see? So it's time to start changing. We're not worried about the tiger at our heels, getting us. We're past that. But transitions have to happen slowly because we have all this inertia built up. This is the way it is. The women are also have a low quality of consciousness and are active to fear and ego. And what does that mean? That means they have adapted to this male-dominant culture. And, that forces the women to go in two directions. They've adapted. And in the beginning, I'm sure they were, that's the way it had to work. And they realized that. It wasn't a problem. They probably weren't, they didn't want equal rights to go grab a spear and fight the tribe next door. They were doing their part, the men were doing their part, and everything worked okay. But now the closer we get to this transition to where we don't need that arrangement so much anymore, now the women find it chafing at the bit because we don't have to be like this anymore. Security shouldn't be the issue. It's not as bad as it was before. A woman can go out and get a job, pay her own way. You see, it's different now. But in any case, yes, the women get pushed into two viewpoints. One, they can say, they can get into the "don't tread on me." I don't like it. I don't like being, I don't like being female in a male-dominant society. And it chafes and they fight back. It's a "don't tread on me." The other side accepts it and says, well, I'm really mostly only good for being tread on. In other words, I accept it as it is. And it's not that's all I'm good for. It's kind of my role. It's where I belong. It's where I feel comfortable. Women have adapted to this thing. This is the way it's been for the last, couple of 100,000 years or million years or so. Women have adapted to this, and they've found, a place in it, just as black people had adapted to living in the United States. They didn't particularly like the racist part, but, they found ways. They established their own communities, their own schools, things where they could. But it's tough. when you're discriminated against to get but so far, you see. So you feel like there's this lid on that it's hard to get through. So that's kind of, it's kind of where we are, but I want people to see this in terms of these big forces going on that take place over millennia, and we're caught up in that, and not see it as a men against the women, that the men are just keeping the women down. It's part of a historical process that was necessary from, earliest, humanoids running around, that we split that way, that we have this genetic program, that we have the larger males skilled in the fighting and the getting resources and that kind of thing, dealing with the scarcity. We have the women who kind of pull it all together with the social aspects of it, and they're doing the inside job of relationship, and the men are doing the outside job of dominating the outside world. So that's man space out there in that outside world. That's what they do. They work in the outside world. They manipulate that outside world. And then the women, they work in the inside space, which has to do with relationship and connections, and kind of pulling everybody and everything together so that it all works, sort of thing. So they're in the relationship world, and that's the way we are now. Women tend to gravitate to operating in the relationship world. That's where they feel comfortable. That's what they do. Men tend to gravitate to manipulating and working in the outside world. That's what they do. Now, that doesn't mean that some women can't go over and work in the outside world, and some men aren't very good, at the relationship world. There isn't any fact, there isn't anything that you can say about all men and women that's true. There are men that go from one pole to the other, and women that go from one pole to the other, and that's good. There's nothing wrong with that diversity. That's good. But we're talking about most of the people, most of the time, kind of fit into these two mindsets. The women are from Venus and the men are from Mars, and that's kind of why. So I guess the point of the discussion is try to get men and women both to see where we are and what we're doing and why we're doing it, and to not make it a war between the sexes, but to realize there are forces bigger than all of us that have kind of made us be this way. And it's not so much mean-spiritedness as it's just the way it was, and now we have to do a couple of things to get through this transition. The biggest thing we could do is increase the quality of our consciousness. Grow toward becoming love, toward caring, toward empathy. This is how we have to develop. Men and the women have to let go of fear. If we live in a fear-based society, then we live in a male-dominant society, because that's where men dominate. In a fearful society that's fearful for their survival, fearful that the boogeyman will get them. The bad guys on the other side of the border will come here. They will be overrun by this or that. They'll be overrun by immigrants. They'll be overrun by foreign powers. They'll be overrun by whatever it is. Fear, fear, fear. Okay, that will keep a male-dominant culture. So if you want to get through this transition, we need to get out of the fear-based viewpoint of the world. We've got to get out of the scarcity-based viewpoint of the world. And then what we'll be left with is a realization that the skills we really need now are the relationship skills. How do we all live together? We've got 7 billion people on this planet. We need to live together. We're getting connected day by day more and more through the internet. We see how each other live. We know each other's problems. What are we going to do about it? We're not just off in a nation state where we're inside our borders and we don't know anything that's going on in the world. We're starting to become citizens, of a world, because we're all integrated now.
And for people who are watching this who really want to do something, and they really want to start to change themselves and want to do something at a grassroots level, how do people start on an individual level to start to?
Well, that's a good point. We have this idea of the way you fix something is to go out and fix it. The problem is not you. The problem is elsewhere. The problem is the leadership. The problem is the men. The problem is the women. The problem is the government, the problem is the monetary system, the problem is, we go on and on and on. All these things are the problem. The problem is the Illuminati that control us all with little puppet strings. We have all these fears, all these problems, and we think the way to solve it, we have to go out and change that, fix that problem, get rid of those people. It doesn't work. That's not how we solve it. The reason those people, they, the infamous they that make it hard for us, the good guys, they, the bad guys, the reason they are like they are is because that's the way we are. Mm-hmm. It's just the way we are. We, the humans, we're like that. The reason that we don't dominate thousands of people is we don't have that much power. We don't happen to be in a position where we make decisions that move 1 million people. So we're harmless in that sense, but it's us. Our leaders, our government, our systems, our institutions, our economies reflect us, we the people. Okay? No leader can lead 1 million people or 100 million people if the 100 million people don't agree to be led. So the problem isn't they. If we change us, the institutions will change. The economy will change. The leadership, the politics will change. We have to change us. And how we change us is one at a time. And there's only one person that you can change, and that's yourself. You can't change anybody else. So instead of manning the ramparts and getting your gun and shaking your fist and swearing and getting upset about them, you'd be much more effective in making the changes you want to make a change by looking in a mirror and saying the change starts here. Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. Exactly right. And that's the only way to make that change come about in the world. You have to be it. So we change ourselves. How do we do that? We have to get rid of our fear, our ego, our beliefs, and go listen to Calgary or one of the other things to find out. What do I mean when I say get rid of ego? Some of you would be saying, oh, well, ego is a good thing. You need an ego or people will walk all over you. It's not so. You see, you have to understand the context in which I'm saying these things. So please go do Calgary and at least listen to Saturday, and you'll know what it is I'm talking about here. We need to improve the quality of our consciousness. That's what that means. You get rid of fear, you get rid of ego, and you become a better person. And if we do that, our institutions will become better institutions. Our governments will be better governments. Our economic systems will be much better economic systems. You can't fix the problem by fixing the symptom. The governments we have, the economic systems we have, are symptoms of our low quality of consciousness. That's why we have them there. You can legislate. That's why we have laws. All of the laws that we have help civilize us by making us behave better. But that civilization is a very thin veneer. That civilization doesn't run very deep. We act polite when we're out in the world. We're polite society. We're nice, we smile, we do the right thing. That doesn't mean that inside, we're very polite, or we care much, or we aren't full of fear and ego and rage and other things. We need, laws are a symptom reliever, a necessary symptom reliever, absolutely necessary, but just a symptom reliever. We can't stop there. It's not like if we had all the right laws, everything would be great. Everything wouldn't be great. People would be polite in public, is what it would be. People would do things so they didn't get caught. You just force all the bad behavior underground, behind closed doors. Well, people go to their own houses. They have to get along. They are how they are.
So it's delimiting on a personal level, because the limitations of the fears, the ego, the beliefs and the expectations, they act as a filter So when somebody, male or female as it happens, is abusing somebody else, those filters stop them from seeing that who they're abusing is a child, a woman, an animal, a man. They just can't see that they're doing that because they're filtered. The filters of the fear and the other limitations stop them from seeing this is a human. Remove those filters, or try to start removing those filters, and then you feel more attached and less separate from fellow man.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's where we need. That's really what we need to do to solve the problem. And the race problem that I was talking about earlier, it's the same way. The race problem was a problem of low quality of consciousness. It was a problem of fear, problem of ego, belief. You know, once you get rid of those things, you actually really solve the problem, not just chase it into the shadows or force it to not look like a problem on the surface. You know, we are only civilized at a very thin veneer, and that shows over and over again. You get a bunch of people, take them out of their cultural law-based environment and let them just kind of loose, and you see very quickly they start acting like, you know, people act 20,000 years ago, right? The culture and the laws and all that kind of fall off real quickly once you get back to survival issues. You know, all that goes away in a hurry. So it's a thin veneer. We don't want the thin veneer solving this problem of the way we dominate females in our culture. And it is a problem. And perhaps 20,000 years ago it wasn't a problem because it was absolutely necessary, and the men and the women all knew it, and they were all working together. But now it's a problem because it isn't necessary. Not only is it not necessary, it's wrong. It hurts everybody. It hurts the women, but it hurts the men too. You know, the men have a less of a life, less of, you know, the happiness and fulfillment that they want. They can't have that until the women can have that too. It's not like, well, the men are in charge and they get everything they want, and the poor women, they suffer. Well, if one suffered, the other one's suffering too. They have to work together, not do the same thing necessarily, but it's a shared responsibility. And when we're working together as equals, then we optimize for everybody. It's more optimal for the men and more optimal for the women. So it's not that by coming to a more equal society as far as gender goes, that's better for the men. They're not losing anything. They're gaining a lot by having that kind of a society. Well, it takes education to get them to see that. And it's the same. The women aren't going to be as successful as they could be by dominating the men. It's the same thing. If it's out of balance, it's out of balance, and everybody suffers. So we need some education to help this transition.
And that thread of truth runs all through different types of teachings that go back thousands of years. Yeah. We just need the balance.
Right.
More harmony, more cooperation.
Yes, exactly.
More awareness, increased awareness, moving towards love.
But see, we can do this now. That was hard to do. Even 50 years ago, it was hard to do. Even if you could do it in one place, that only affected a small group of people. But now the world is kind of tied together by an internet, by news media, by airplanes, by electricity. We're all connected in ways that we have a chance now to solve these problems.
As you say, there's no big wars going on, so we've got a break now. We've got a window here.
We've got a chance to do something now. We have the infrastructure. We have something that'll build awareness. You can build, the internet's a wonderful tool for building awareness. We have tools that we didn't have before. The tiger's not at the door. There are not, the Gestapo isn't at the door either. Neither of those are at the door. This is our opportunity. And obviously, both men and women see that. But we have to get all of us to see it. And But I'm real hopeful for it because it's, if you go back hundreds of years, it wasn't going to happen because that was the kind of environment that we were in. It just wasn't going to happen because it was a male-dominant society because it needed to be just to survive. It's not true anymore. Now we need balance. What the world needs now are those female skills of how do we all get along? Let's pull ourselves together. A social glue rather than a warrior protecting or grabbing, either one. So we're in the process of making that shift to not just a more civilized society, but a more grown up, higher quality of consciousness society. I think we're on the doorstep, but don't expect it to be quick.
No, I'm sure.
These are big things. Things that are that big have huge inertia. But if you get them rolling, they can actually go along pretty quickly. Like I remember from the racism in the U.S. in the 50s to the racism in the U.S. today is totally different. From what was an in-your-face, mean-spirited kind of attitude, it's not there anymore, for the most part. It's there now in more subtle ways. It's gotten, it's gone from not subtle at all to subtle. So there's still a ways to go. I mean, we still have to progress further, but gee, that's only been, 50-some years, 50 or 60 years. Well, 50, 60 years in a historian's viewpoint, it's an eye blink. That's nothing. So it may take us another 50 or 60 years with this discrimination. But that's quick. May not be in my lifetime, your lifetime, but maybe our children's, our grandchildren's. I don't see it as that far away because all the pieces are here now. We have the infrastructure, we have the communications. It's not just a problem in the U.S. or a problem in England or a problem in India or a problem in China. It's a problem in the world. And we can see that because we now have vision all around the world. It's a different ball game now. And we don't have the things driving male dominance in our culture anymore. In fact, we have things driving the female skill set. If we could just learn to get along, if we could just learn this relationship thing and make good relationships, we'd do a lot better. Well, we would. So it's the female skill set it's what we need.
And we have to put some work into it.
Yeah. And we need the men and the women both to look inside and stop blaming. It's not about blame. It's not about guilt. If it is about blame, then you're part of the problem. You're not part of the solution. So if you're out there, be you male or female, and if it's your fault kind of an attitude where it's about blame, you're part of the problem. You need to get over that and grow up and become part of the solution. Blame is not the answer. Just fix yourself. Get rid of your own fear. Because that's what that is. That it's you and blame. That's fear talking. That's ego talking. So we need to pull that finger back and not do that. Instead, get rid of that fear. Get rid of that ego. And now you become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And it doesn't matter what side you're on. If it's blame, it's a fear issue and you're part of the problem.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.